I welcome you all to this. I am overwhelmed with the number of people that signed up for this, but I am glad, and I'm going to talk a little bit about my background in the presentation. There's a slide, but let me say a little bit more about that that's not in the slides and what leads up to this talk anyway. I was president of Cape Fear Audubon here in Wilmington for about 8 years, but prior to that, I've been birding for years and years. And when in Audubon, we started with one of the ornithologists that teaches at University of Wilmington at North Carolina, University of North Carolina at Wilmington. We started establishing a bird-friendly habitat criteria. And along about that time, Doug Tallamy, who many of you probably know all about, came out with his book talking about the natives and birds. And boy, that just put it all together. I ended up having Doug Tallamy come to Wilmington about 3 times to talk to us. And so that really got me started on the insects and the birds. Well, I was part of the Native Plant Society somewhere along in that time frame, and you just can't separate native plants from birds. They just they go together. And so when I left Audubon, where I'm still involved with Audubon, I just got into birds via native plants. And I have not seen any actual data, I'm sure probably does exist out there, about just how many insects that our backyard birds need to survive. And so I started trying to put together a little analysis of this. And I will say that I have talked with a couple of ornithologists that teach at the university and verified some of the stuff I was assuming. So while it's not really, maybe not totally accurate, it's just not that controversial with the ornithologists anyway. Okay. If you look at the mission of both Cape Fear Audubon and the Native Plant Society, they are very, very nature oriented about what we need to do or what we need to do to preserve our ecosystems. So let's see now, where is there he is. I think my keyboard works to the next one. Well, today is the first day of spring, folks. And have you seen your robin? There's my robin. Saw the Batman movie and saw the first robin. I can't, since you're all muted, I can't hear you laugh. That's going to be, it's going to be tough on a comedian. Anyway, who am I? There's where I say who I am a little bit. You see that my background is not a biologist or an ornithologist or any of those things pertaining to what I'm doing now. I was congressional liaison for the National Reconnaissance Office. So those are the people that build the spy satellites. And originally from San Diego, and graduated San Diego State College as physics, electronic engineer. And there's where I said already passed membership. I've been here in Wilmington for 21 years now. But let's go on here. This looks like I'm name dropping, but really these folks are really been important to me, and I want to acknowledge them. Ray Danner is a good friend of mine. I just finished taking auditing the ornithology class from him just last semester, and found out there's a lot of things we don't know about birds. I learned a lot, but there's a lot we don't know about them. And Jamie Rotenberg, he's the doctor, he's retired now, but he's a professor that I worked with on Audubon with the native plant, the bird-friendly habitat. And we're still good friends. He's retired, but we still have lunch together. And I sit there and learn something from him every time we have lunch. Paul Hosier is a biologist. He's retired also. He's got the book, write a book, many of you are probably aware of it, the native plants of the seacoast, I think, something to that effect, plants of the Carolinas. But anyway, Darren Pennies is still teaching at the UNCW. He leads a lot of our walks. He's a lot of help to me. And who doesn't know Larry Mellenchamp? He even allegedly signed up for this. I hope he's in the audience. And Larry, if you are, glad to have you aboard. And you've been precious to me and what you've taught me. Doug Tallamy, you got to see a picture of me there on the right. Am I gushing? Yes. That was the first time I met Doug when he came to speak. So I am gushing there about being able to shake Doug Tallamy's hand because he's my hero. Then Roger Shue is a great guy here in Wilmington. He leads us on to the Green Swamp. If you've never been down to Wilmington, been to the Green Swamp, go there. It's fantastic. Then Valerie Robertson, I talk to her about every week about anything and everything. She's a publisher of Going Green. It's a local magazine here. So that's people that I want to really give credit to. And let's continue on here. And I will say a disclaimer: any errors are mine and not the people we're talking about. When I started birding, it was, from San Diego. I did my birding in the Borrego Desert, which is about 100 miles east of San Diego. And here's some of the birds that I really liked. The little phainopepla, I call him Peppy. He looks kind of like a black cardinal. Cactus wren, I was just amazed how they manipulated around on those cactus and even built their nest in the cactus. And a sweet little burrowing owl. I just love that guy. So that got me fired up in birding back in the 60s. And my only sighting of a golden eagle was out there in Borrego. This was not what I sighted. I sighted a couple of them flying overhead, but that's the only time I've ever seen a golden eagle. And I'm going to be preaching to the choir for some of you. I know some of you have been around Native Plant Society for a while. You know what a native plant is. But some of you, I've got some emails from some people that were newbie to the area and wanted to learn about this and that. So to keep everybody on the same page, here's a definition of a native plant. And I like the one that's down in green, a plant that occurs naturally in the place where it evolved. That's as simple as I can get for that. Invasive definition. Well, not all plants, that foreign plants are native, as I say in the end, but a lot of the plants that came over from Asia or even Australia, they can be invasive, i.e. take over a planted area, which is detrimental to your gardening, but it's also detrimental to the birds because usually they don't support any bird activity, bird food. I think somebody told me, or I read somewhere, or this being the first invasive non-native plant to the USA. So if somebody knows better, send me an email and say, hey, Charlie, you're wrong. The real first non-native invasive was XYZ. This is, again, basic elementary stuff. You know this. But I need to say it just to make it pure and simple. We don't think about it as the sun being the source, all energy that we get on Earth here comes from the sun. We kind of take it for granted, just like we take the air for granted. It's there. We get up in the morning and we breathe. We get up in the morning, go outside, and the sun is there if there's no clouds. But there's a simple food web. Sun, energy, native plant. The plant creates the material in the leaves that the caterpillars will eat, and then our birds will eat the caterpillars. And of course, same thing. We eat whatever eats the plants. And then at the end, kind of a little different season for our birds is native plants that produce seeds and berries. Well, obviously, put a non-native plant in that food web and, you knock off the bird food, i.e. the caterpillars. Of course, you reduce the birds. One of the things I do when I give a lot of my talks on native plants, like I'm doing now, is I talk to people and I say, do you like birds? And most everyone says, yeah, I like birds. I like to see the birds around. Well, then I say, hey, if you want to see the birds around, we got to do the native plants. So almost anytime, even if I don't call my talk native plants, I talk about the birds and how they need native plants. This is a big thing to read. There was a New York Times magazine, I believe, that talked about the insect apocalypse and just how they were really declining. And this is some other words or whatever from I pulled off of Cornell's website, how we're really losing our birds. This is the average. We're losing about 1%. And at 1%, doesn't sound like a big number, but if you're an old goat like me and you've been around for over 50 years, that's 50% of our birds that we're losing over 50 years. So, hey, maybe that perks you up a little bit to think about losing that large percentage. Well, just like you and I, birds need food, water, and shelter. I do this with kids in 4th grade talking about birds. And I say, what are the things you need? Food, water, and shelter? And I said, yeah. I said, do you need an iPhone? Yeah, I need an iPhone. And I have to convince them that I could live without an iPhone, but that's hard to do. But anyway, we're going to concentrate on the food for the birds. Let's look at some of our common backyard birds here. Good old Carolina chickadee, eastern bluebird, painted bunting, prothonotary warbler. That painted bunting was a picture was taken on my back deck. I am fortunate enough to have the buntings come to my feeder in the bunting time, which starts about in the middle of April. And brown-headed nuthatch. That's a little one that sounds like a squeaky toy when you get around some bunch of pine trees and you hear a squeaky toy. It's this little brown-headed nuthatch. Tufted titmouse, downy woodpecker. He's one of our smaller woodpeckers. Red-headed woodpecker. He's really a pretty bird with that red head. I love him coming to my backyard. Well, as I said earlier, do you want them around? And I can't imagine anybody sitting there listening to me doesn't want birds coming around. So they need food, and not just seeds. Even like our cardinal, which you think is a seed eater, they get into the insects too, as I'll talk about. This is where we talk about the insects in all of our birds. 96% of our backyard land birds, our migratory birds. The shore birds are different topic, but our migratory backyard birds, the ones you think of coming and going from our backyard, are feed their young insects. And the answer is, why insects? Well, the answer is protein. They want to get those youngsters out of the nest, feed them as well as they can, and so they give them primarily caterpillars, but any insect that's high in protein to get those guys fledged and out of the nest. Here is taking a whack at the numbers of insects, and the little star on that Carolina chickadee is because Doug Tallamy made that estimate. He tells me he had a student sat there watching a chickadee come and go, and counted a number of times that the bird came in to feed him, and it turns out his first thing was around 400 a day, but later on he upped it to around 465 insects a day. When you think about that little few ounce Carolina chickadee for 17 days going out and finding 400, actually a pair of chickadees going out finding over 400 insects, it's quite a job. When I have my students, I say, how would you like to go out and find 400 insects every day? And they say, oh, they said, that'd be fun. I said, well, think about that. You have to get up every morning at 8 o'clock and go out and find those insects. Anyway, I talked to my ornithologist friends and I said, look, I don't know what the painted bunting, the prothonotary warbler, and the brown-headed nuthatch how many insects per day that they do. What if I use the same number for all those other birds that I'm using for the chickadee? And they said, well, that sounds reasonable. That's not something unreasonable for you to do. So my ornithologist agreed that I could use the 465 for each one of those birds. So if you do that, multiply the 465 times the number of days. By the way, the number of days comes from the Cornell website, all about birds, and they list the number of days that a bird is in the nest being fed. Anyway, you add up that number for getting those birds out of the nest, and you got a grand total of, as you see, 62,775. Well, that's only 8 birds. What about all the other birds? I think one of the bird counts, I counted, I think around 16. Somebody wants in, so I'll let them in. 16 backyard birds in one day, and that probably didn't get them all. So I'm throwing in another double that number I had before to say this is how many insects those birds need for that period, that nesting period. Well, I'm not done with that number yet. You know, after fledging, they still run around on the ground. Some of the seed eaters are learning how to eat seeds, but they're still being fed some insects. So for lack of any other rationale, I just threw that in 1/2 again, giving a grand total of, as you see, 188,000 insects needed to fledge those, in this case, 16 birds. Is that too high? I don't know. But even 1/2 that amount is a lot. Just, you know, I say assume this number is as an order of magnitude. There's too many assumptions to make it be exact. Plus, you know, not all birds have their nests at the same time, so the foraging for insects may spread out over several months. But gosh, you know, you think about that's still a lot of insects that our little birds have to go out and find to get those youngsters to go. So it's kind of, if you will, food for thought. Well, you know the answer to that. I'm still admitting these are they mostly coming from plants? Well, the answer is no. You know that answer. It's natives. And I say, but what if they can't find them? And why not? And you know, you probably already know the answer to that too. Well, as you drive around your neighborhood, as I drive around my neighborhood, I see where they're knocking out habitat and putting up houses and condos and whatever else. And then to add injury to insult, when they're all done, they bring in the non-native plants to plant in the landscaping. So, you know, it's not a good thing. It's why our birds are declining. Somebody asked, and I had the question down below, how long it take for a plant to evolve to where it acts like a native? And the answer is millions of years, thousands of years at least. It's a long time. It doesn't happen in a couple hundred years that we've been bringing in the non-natives. Well, as I say, we should use more natives in our yard and join in on any effort to preserve natural green areas. And there's a lot of movements, a lot of people. You go to your nursery and try to get the nursery riparian. But let's look and see what's going on with the plants around us. Here's a wax myrtle and a Virginia creeper. Both of these are natives. And I picked plants that show up maybe a little bit of the extreme of insect activity. And Doug Tallamy tells me that birds, when they're looking for insects, they don't really look for insects. They look for insect activity, such as this. It gives them a clue that, hey, there's something there eating that plant, so I might find a little morsel to bring back to my young. So, keep admitting somebody here. So, green ash, I picked a couple others, persimmon, these are natives. You see the insect activity. Redbud, grape, again, natives with some insect activity. Well, how about the camellia? Look at the insect activity on the camellia. The leaves are pristine. There's just no insect activity. Unfortunately, a camellia is not a invasive, so while I have some in my yard, I tolerate them because they are there and they were there when I moved in, but they just don't provide any food source. They do provide shelter for a bird that a young one can hide from a predator. I hear some sound. Somebody needs to mute themselves. I hear some background sound. Anyway, oh, the good old crepe myrtle, which is one of my highly disliked plants. It's not an invasive in the true invasive name, but I believe it acts like an invasive because landscapers plant so many of them. It's just all over the place because of landscapers planting them. But look at the leaves; they are just, no food, no insects on there, no food source whatsoever. And gardenia, it's just a lovely, nice smelling plant, and I have one in my yard also. But look at look at those beautiful leaves. There's not an insect in sight. Again, it's not an invasive. It sits there and behaves itself. It doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't do anything bad, so it stays there. And the azalea. If anybody is in and around the Wilmington area, we have the Azalea Festival here, and you would tend to believe that the azalea is a native plant. It's not. I understand, I've been told, I've never seen it, that there is a caterpillar that does feed on or host on the azalea that's not native. But again, you look at the leaves, you can tell it's not very popular for insects. Well, let's go back to natives for a moment. And as a little late here, I introduced him earlier, but if you've not read his initial book, Bringing Nature Home, I highly advise you do so. You can go on YouTube and find one of his lectures and listen to it. If you want to not read the book, but hear what's in the book, that's an easy way of doing it. Like I said, not all native plants are created equal. The oak is up the top of the list. There's a number of Lepidoptera that's supported. Now, what is a Lepidoptera? That's the larva stage of the moth and the butterfly, i.e. the caterpillar. That's the caterpillar. And oak is the winner. And I had an interview with Doug when he was here one of the times, and he actually stayed with me, which was a trip in itself. But we had a interview, sat around the kitchen table before I took him to his airplane, and I asked him, what's the top of the list for the best plant for birds? And he said the white oak. So he named the white oak as #1. And then he said, well, but he said the black cherry, which is #2 here, he says it's pretty darn good too, because not only does it have blooms and leaves that have insects, it also has berries that the oak doesn't. It has berries so that the birds can go after the berries when it produces berries. So those top 2 are really great plants. And then you go down the list and you see that as you go down, as I said, not all natives are created equal from the bird standpoint. There's other criteria you could pick that those plants are great. And go to the perennials. Up the top of the list is a goldenrod, and there's well, if Larry's listening, he'll correct me here, but I think there's about 13 species of those goldenrods around. and I have 4 or 5 of them coming up every year in my yard, and they're very popular for supporting the Lepidoptera. You get all down to lobelia, cardinal flower, which is a great flower. I love that beautiful flower, and I'll have it anyway, even if it only supports 4. It's just a gorgeous, gorgeous flower. So, from the bird food standpoint, goldenrod wins. Well, let's go switch seasons, because I've been talking about the early seasons when the birds are trying to feed their young and they're going after the caterpillars and trying to find the caterpillars. Now we got to talk about, the birds need a good habitat to prepare for migration, i.e. or survive the winter, i.e. staying home. And good for the birds, that's the migration time, and that's when the plants are producing the seeds. And they will stoke up on the seeds. Here are some, I show some of the good seed producing plants, obviously not all. Good old blackberries, blueberries, which I have blueberry bushes, and I'm sometimes out there racing to try to have a blueberry or 2 off my bush before the birds get to them. And sometimes I win, sometimes the birds win. Go down the way, cherries, the prunus, which I talked about. Spice bush down the bottom is a very, very popular one. But, you can, I think I say it next. Let's see here. Oh yeah, observation actions. Walk around the neighborhood and look at your, I try to leave dead plants with seeds in the fall and let the birds go after what's on them. And maybe, walk around the neighborhood and see some of the action of the birds on some of the plants that you don't have that you see them doing. And you'll see the chickadees stripping small seeds. I'd love to get some pictures of some of the chickadees or cardinals, particularly chickadees, stripping some of the small seeds off of plants. Okay, last but not least here, mycorrhiza fungus. And many of you are going to say, what and why? One of my talks to someplace, I said, how many have heard of mycorrhiza fungus? And I had an audience of 30. I had one person raise his hand, and he was a botanist that taught up in Raleigh. So I wasn't surprised that he knew about it. But as I say down there in my bullets, they thrive with the existence of this fungus, and that's because of the symbiotic relationship. The fungus is underground, obviously, and it can seek out and supply water and nutrients to the plants. Since the fungus is underground and doesn't have the sun to the chlorophyll and the conversion of sunlight energy to chemicals or to sugars, the plant can give the simple sugars to the fungus. So that's the symbiotic relationship. Now, I think I'm going to really overwhelm you here, with a picture. Everyone's got to have a crowded picture that you can't read. But bear with me on this. I encourage you to go to that down to the bottom where I say Google National Geographic mycorrhiza fungus talking trees image, and you'll come up with this image. I'm going to talk a little bit about it anyway and break down some of it. But to the left, my left, where it says the word next to talking trees, got a huge tree, and right near it is a small tree. Well, that huge tree can pass nutrients to the small tree to help it develop. It's being shaded by the canopy, and it doesn't really get as much sun energy. And even the mother tree, as they'll sometimes call it, can give nutrients to a different species of tree. Like I think it's birch there in the middle of the picture. And over on the far side, it shows some red. What they're doing is one tree is basically signaling to another tree that, hey, there's an infestation going on. You need to up your chemical resistance to fight off the infestation. Now, I think I show some a little more detail of this image here. Yeah. You can also Google Suzanne Simard, there, her name in there, and she can talk. She talks a little bit about this in there, about how she observed what's going on in Canadian forest. But right below that little wordage there, where it shows a picture of a root, you can see the little hairy stuff on the root is the fungus. Very, very fine, and that's the point. Is it can seek out moisture and nutrients because it's got very fine fibers and pass them on to the larger root. And as I said before about the taller tree, hub trees, I call it a mother tree, and can pass nutrients to other trees. And yeah, weaker trees can get nutrients from some of the other trees. So mycorrhiza fungus is very important. And let's go back there. What I want to say is I have heard from, when I talk to biologists, is that fertilizers can, particularly excessive fertilizers, can destroy or kill the fungus. So I tend not to use any fertilizer because I want my fungus to thrive. Plus, usually, if you have decent soil, you don't need to fertilize your natives. They have evolved over the years, just cooking along and what they've got. So unless you've got a real terrible soil that you're starting out with, you really don't need to fertilize. You need to perhaps get your soil conditioned before you even plant. But encourage mycorrhiza fungus wherever you can, if you even can see it. That's the problem. You can't dig a hole in the ground and say, oh, there it is. You can't see it. Natives and butterflies. You can't exactly see that well, but this blue mistflower, or the long Latin name there, also known as wild ageratum, I counted at one time, and I don't know if it was in this picture or not, I counted 8 monarchs getting nectar off of this bush or this plant. It's a whole series of plants there. They love it. And one of my measures is if I ever have a monarch, and in the later years I haven't seen many monarchs, they will come to this plant. So I encourage this plant as much as I can to attract the monarchs, at least for nectar reasons. In the springtime, I try to grow the milkweeds for the host plant also. Sometimes I have a decent crop of milkweed, and sometimes I don't have so many. Little quiz for you folks. Here's a close-up of the butterfly. And is that a male or a female? Everybody just yelling out the answer, which I can't hear. Well, I'll tell you the answer. It's a male, because those little bitty black spots there you see is indication that it's a male. So if you didn't know this before, next time you see a monarch, you can identify male or female, whether it has those little dots or not. Little added observation chore for you to do with the monarch. Just to throw in another little pretty butterfly that I have around on that loves that mistflower is the Gulf fritillary. And we have a ton of those around. And if you don't know this, Nandina has been shown to poison some of our birds, so we don't really want Nandina around. It's a non-native. It doesn't seem to be invasive. It stays in one place, but it is not a good plant to have for birds. Well, in summary, a lot of you already know this about native plants. They do benefit birds, food and shelter. They're low maintenance. No watering unless we have drought conditions, and with climate change, I think sometimes we're seeing some of those dry periods. No fertilizing, no mowing, i.e. eliminate the lawn, which I have almost done. I got a little bit in my backyard, which my wife won't let me get rid of. And obviously, it promotes local native biodiversity. There's that book by Paul Hosier, Seacoast Plants of the Carolinas. I almost got the name right. And of course, Larry Millichamp's big book, which is just about the best book on around. And Larry, if you're online, I'll tell you again, you got a great book. I've already told him that several times, but tell him one more time. So let's see what's next. Ah, yes. You probably can't read this, which sorry about that, but I show you the list only because to show you there's a lot of things there. This is from the Coastal Landscapes Initiative. It's a committee that is primarily organized along the coast of North Carolina. So people inland really won't participate, won't know about it, but a lot of the stuff they do can apply to all of North Carolina. But what I want to say is if there's a lot of handouts, a lot of good data that you can download, and that's what's listed there. If you go to that website down at the bottom, it's this pretty simple one, North Carolina State University.edu/coastal landscapes. And then you scroll down that website, you'll come to this list in red that you can click on. And I've got an arrow next to one of them because I think this applies to pretty much everybody across the state. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit. So NC Coastal Landscape Design. The coastal, I'll put a little, you might be able to get by using the idea elsewhere. So let's go with that. There it is. It's a multi-page document. And to go to the next one to show you one of the pages. Oh, I see. This is what's, I don't even know what I'm talking next. This is what's covered in there is if you want to do screening with trees, got a template in there. And I got outlined bird-friendly screen. There's a template in there for that. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 templates in that booklet. And I'm going to talk about just one of them, the bird-friendly screen, just to show you the design or the idea of the template. There is one of the templates, one of the pages, and it's a bird-friendly screen, and it starts off with showing some of the plants that they're recommending. And I can tell one of them with even viewing, there's a beautyberry there, the second one over from the left. But way down to the right, there's a table showing the plants that they're recommending. And the description talks a little bit about the plants, and they're talking about, they're probably readily available from nurseries. And then the maintenance, talk about the maintenance of what you need to do. And that pretty much is true about all native plants. You have to water them at the beginning. But, and then, kind of a plan view showing what some of the plants would be compared to a person. And I don't think it fits for everybody, but to show you how they laid them out. So this is a example of one of the templates, and there's a template for all those things I talked about before. And I'll go back to that now that you know what it is. There's a template for each one of those. Screening with vines. Anyway, this is a just got a noisy mail. Anyway, that's the end. And I threw this out when I give this talk every year to the ornithology class, Ray Danner's ornithology class. And so I threw out, what species is this bird? And the hooker is, it's not a native bird. And it is a robin, but a robin redbreast in Great Britain. So that's a robin redbreast from Great Britain. So I am done, and I will stop sharing. And I believe Linda was collecting questions. So,
well, Charlie, that was such a great and clear presentation that no one put any questions into the chat. So, but maybe they'll have some questions now. So anybody who has any questions?
I put them asleep. I think I put them asleep.
Not at all. Nobody left, which I think is really impressive for Zoom on such a beautiful spring day.
Yeah, it is. It is. I thought they'd leave right after they showed my sighting of the robin. Well, yes, we can unmute, I guess, and ask on verbally, or you can do it since there's not that many people clamoring. If you want to unmute and ask a question, we'll probably.
Oh, we've got a question here from Jeff, which he's asking, what makes the nandina poisonous?
Well, it's the toxin in the berries, and I don't know what chemical it is. It's just what I read about the toxin. It was a lot of the cedar waxwings evidently were found dead, and they did an autopsy. I guess you call it an autopsy. There's another name for it, and found the berries in their stomach, and it determined there's some toxin in there that did it. I've never personally seen birds die of it, but I don't want to take the chance. If you like the bush because it has the red leaves, just go cut off the berries.
And I have found that they spread in my yard. I started with a little hedge, and I had to dig up 60 when I really realized what the problem was.
Okay, they do it. They are invasive then. I don't have any, so I don't know.
Now, here's a good question from Michael. He's asking, is there any guidance document directed to developers to help them make good choices?
Huh. Don't get me going on developers. I would say that template I showed would be a good one for developers, because that is developers, you mean by developers mean that they're going to mow down all the trees and put up the condos? Is that what you mean?
I bet we're almost all of us are living in a home built by a developer. So
yeah. So I don't know how to answer that from the developer standpoint. The first thing you want to tell a developer is don't mow down the trees and all that, but I don't think there's any. First of all, there's no law against it, and I don't think there's any guidance that says don't mow down the trees. What I would really like to see is guidance for the landscapers, which would be that template. So to answer your question, I don't know of anything to get after the developers.
but that's actually a really interesting project for the Native Plant Society to look at.
Yeah, how do we approach that? I don't know. That is such a big, I'll call it an industry. That's such a huge industry of developers, real estate people that end up on the city boards, and all they want to do is build more. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. That's a good question to bring up.
Well, I'm not seeing any other questions, but I bet, Charlie, would you say that you would answer any that people send to your email directly?
Most certainly, most certainly. Plus, I do have some handouts that have been developed by the Native Plant Society. It's a bunch of different ones, like native grasses, plants that are colors by season. Oh geez, I can't think of about 6 or 7 of them that are oriented towards one way or another, and they are available as PDFs, so I can send them to anybody. They can download them, and that template that I talked about is downloadable from that Coastal Landscapes Initiative site. But yeah, certainly send me an email, and if I don't have the answer, I will try to direct you to it.
Well done. Well done. Well, thank you so much, everybody. I saw lots of thank yous go through in the chat. I think you did just a great job. We will have this video up in 3 or 4 days on the website. So if you know people who might be interested in it, please let them know that that's available, and we hope to see you at the next meeting.